You all already heard from me today, but the one thing I will add to my biography is that I teach land use law at both the University of Colorado and University of Denver, so I'm good at asking difficult questions.
All right.
So we'll start there.
Very good. All right.
So rather than have me introduce the three of you, why don't you each take 2 minutes to introduce yourselves? And since this is a panel about protests, why don't you add your favorite protest song into your introduction? So let's go down the line.
So I'm going to save everyone and not sing anything for you. My name is Joanne Hardesty, and I have the pleasure of serving on the Portland City Council. I have 30-plus years of protest experience, either organizing them, being a part of them, and since I'm on a city council, I call myself a community organizer that just happened to get elected to the city council. I continue to see myself in my role as a community organizer and to work for the most vulnerable people in our community. So I'll stop there.
Hi, everybody. Juan Chavez. Very happy to be sitting next to the good commissioner. And I'm a lawyer in town. I am the project director for the Civil Rights Project at the Oregon Justice Resource Center. We're a nonprofit that primarily serves folks who are incarcerated. Indeed, that's probably the bulk of my work. I do prisoner 1983 suits. But a lot of that obviously parlays into police accountability work, which I'm one of the counsels on one of our injunctive relief claims here in Portland. I also represent one of the amici in our quasi-consent decree case against the Portland Police Bureau. And my favorite protest song is All You Fascists Are Bound to Lose.
I'm Bob Christie. I'm the out-of-towner. I'm from Seattle. I'm a private lawyer with a small litigation firm that does primarily defense work. And for 40 years, I've been defending law enforcement agencies all across Washington State, Idaho, and Arizona. And in that capacity, was actively involved 2 years ago right now in defending the city of Seattle in a series of cases that were brought under a consent order that we're going to talk a little bit about. So I'm on the opposite side of the caption that Juan is on, but approach it in the same way I'm sure you do, with great integrity, respect for trying to tell a story that comes out of a complicated setting. And I think we'll share some of that today. And my favorite protest song is Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's Ohio from 1970. So I was old enough to remember when that came out.
Excellent, thank you. So before we get into the substance, I would also ask, so we've got a number of young lawyers in the audience. For Bob and Juan, what drew you to your particular practice? And then for you, Commissioner Hardesty, because we need good people to run for office. How did you decide to run for office? So maybe we'll go the other direction.
Okay, good enough. Well, I'm a trial lawyer and have tried a lot of cases over a long time. And it really comes out, I think, out of a love of storytelling, because ultimately I see effective trial advocacy as storytelling. And in a creative setting that's very different from case to case, really following up on what the judge's remarks were earlier, the reason I'm still in this business is I'm passionate about it. I love what I do. I love interacting with other lawyers, holding myself and others to a high sense of professionalism, and it drew me into the profession, and it's kept me here. So I'll conclude with that.
And like I said earlier, I started in prisoner litigation primarily, so Section 1983 was kind of my inroad, and I really felt like that was an underserved need, certainly across the country, but also absolutely here in Oregon. And I think I had a couple of pro bono assignment police cases, and that did give me a sense of, how do I negotiate with the city? What is the Bureau? How is it set up? What are the common, long-standing, well-known, and documented problems of our city's police bureau. But I think protest cases themselves, there's no better radicalization thing than having a tear gas canister launched to your head, which I think the first one for me was about 2 blocks that way at Pioneer Square. I want to say that was like 2015 or so. And it's really hard to come back from that. And and so protester cases, I have enough friends with the public defender's office or with other criminal defense attorneys that those cases can kind of get filtered my way. And then I fell in with a bad crowd of other plaintiffs, 1983 lawyers who have also helped me learn and join in on a lot of fun lawsuits.
Well, let me say that I played a lawyer in Salem. I was a state legislator for 3 terms, and I served all 3 terms on the Judiciary Committee. And I will tell you, as the new young kid on the block back then, I was like, I want to be on Judiciary. Because at that time, voters had passed what became the stiffest one-strike-you're outlaw in the country. It's called Ballot Measure 11, and it's still on the books here in Oregon. 15, 16, and 17-year-olds tried as adults with severe, long sentences, mandatory. So that got me to want to run to be a state legislator, because what I knew was the legislature would actually do the implementing legislation. So it's a voter-approved ballot measure. So on being on the judiciary, I would say I was the common sense lawyer, right? We had a lot of certified smart people on the committee, but I was the one that said, well, what's going to happen in my neighborhood when we know how police already interact with black and brown kids in my community? How is this going to impact them? It's going to exacerbate it. And guess what? We knew it would, and it did. So I was also a pretty reluctant candidate for Portland City Council back in 2018. And the reason was actually a protest that got me to decide I need to run to be on the city council. I will set the stage for you. There was a secret negotiation to give police officers a pay raise and to give them bonuses to recruit their friends to be police officers. And it happened, and all of a sudden, it was on the city council agenda. So I ride my bus number 20 downtown to City Hall, and I get there, and City Hall is surrounded by riot cops. And I'm like, what the heck? So once I get inside, because, I've been in Portland a long time, and I'm not really intimidated by a whole lot of riot cops. So I get inside, and I go, what's going on? We have a threat that there will be upset people showing up at City Hall. Well, you think? When you negotiate a salary increase in secret behind closed doors and put it on the fast track for passage? But that day, the police created a riot. The police actually pushed people out of City Hall. Elderly people that came with their children. Because guess what? This contract was of importance to a lot of people. And that was the day. Because what I knew was that if one person on the city council that day had said no to surrounding City Hall with riot police, it would not have happened. So that was the day I decided we need somebody different on the Portland City Council.
I got a client out of that. We're finally going to trial in December.
Really? It takes a long time for justice,
yes.
doesn't it?
So, my next question is for Juan and Bob. Tell us a little bit about you've had some involvement in representing different parties to protest activities, and I know that you may have a presentation, and you're going to need to open that laptop to show it. Yes. So why don't you start, Juan? Maybe you go first, and
Sure. Let me see what the tech situation is.
it should be on the desktop.
Let's see. Taking a second to wake up, as am I still. But oh wait, Control Alt. Okay. Where's delete? There it is. Okay. Oh, looks like we need a password.
Do we
here
have
we
an
go,
IT?
right here.
Password to the computer from Marcia Boone. Anybody? No.
We're gonna get her.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Maybe we could sing one of the protest songs
Yeah,
while waiting. I don't know. Or Juan, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Right. So I'm one of the councils, one of the 9 councils on the lawsuit "Don't Shoot Portland v. City of Portland." Pretty fantastic name. We represent a nonprofit in town, Don't Shoot Portland, that formed around the various lives that are taken by police, the black lives that have been taken by police, and that organization does provide protest support, educational events, and generally has been out there doing the work. And in addition to that, we have 7 other named plaintiffs who were all injured within certainly the first week of the protests in Portland in 2020 following the murder of George Floyd. And we pretty quickly saw on night 1 of the serious kind of intensification of Portland protests, which would have been about May 29th, 2020, we knew we were off to a rocky start and things were going to fall apart very quickly in the city. So what we saw within those first couple of days was just rampant, indiscriminate use of tear gas, of different kind of munitions, either from a 40 millimeter launcher, 40 millimeters that's fairly thick, can provide, can be lethal, can seriously injure people, can lose people limbs, as well as use of grenades of various kinds, whether they flash and explode, whether they explode with pellets, so really kind of like little rubber ball, shrapnel, and also another very dangerous weapon, a FN 303, which is kind of like an airsoft gun that shoots pepper spray pellets at people from a great distance. And that was happening pretty uniformly against anybody who dared to be out in the streets to protest another black life that was taken by the police. What we recognized as the common constitutional problem there is that with every Fourth Amendment, this
probably
is
not your
not
deck.
it, but it sounds like a great topic. So, let's see, tribal, ABA housing. I got a jump drive with at least mine on it. I don't see the.
Which one are you looking for?
I think mine was ABA, don't shoot.
This is the judge panel, right? Which panel? Are we looking
Oh, we're the protest panel.
Oh, that's you. I should know that, shouldn't I? That's not
So,
it.
yeah, that's not it. I got an emergency copy though.
Put it in.
Sure.
Sounds good.
We have a video, so this is worth it.
Right. Don't worry, I
We
will be the
promise.
substitute teacher wheeling in the TV very soon. So the Fourth Amendment consideration was pretty apparent, I think, from the beginning, and I think the harder thing to, nope, that's not me, unless I took somebody else's jump drive without knowing.
Let me get it.
All of us on pins and needles. We just
Right,
can't wait.
right.
Come on, come on.
I apologize in advance. It won't. The build-up won't probably be worth it. But and of course, the First Amendment considerations, I think, is what's most obvious too. What does the First Amendment say about this kind of mass violence? What we know, at least in litigating these claims, is that government bodies cannot retaliate for content of speech or for the sometimes in the form of the speech either. How we know when that happens is, what are they doing? Why are they doing it? Why, what is the nexus with the speech conduct? And does it chill people's willingness to go out again and speak? And what I heard from every last person who went out there is, I don't know why I keep going out. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And there are people with untold, certainly unlitigated traumas, injuries, pain and suffering that we'll never truly account for. But we tried with this lawsuit, which at least we filed it as a class action. Oh no, yeah, doesn't seem to be opening. I'll give my email address sometime. I'll send you the video.
Take this with me and
Okay.
bring it back.
Sure. And so we filed a temporary restraining order, and I'll add that fun as it isn't to think about how things were at that time with the pandemic, it was another whole other thing to try to mount this kind of motion under the stress of that. Portland, maybe surprisingly, gets pretty hot in the summer. Not a lot of air conditioning, so I was sweating at home writing this motion, and I'll never forget wearing a sweatband while typing this stuff out. We got in front of one of our federal judges fairly quickly, Judge Hernandez, and he had a ruling by the end of the day, and it ordered basically for the Portland Police Bureau to just follow the Constitution, because you weren't before. And in addition to that, there was some additional strictures on when and how the Portland police could use tear gas, basically in circumstances where life and safety were threatened, and if they can, to the best of their ability, assure that only people who are engaging in criminal conduct were being affected by that. Funny thing about tear gas is that it is a aerosolized pain agent that causes inflammation of the lungs, and we're coming to learn certainly endocrinological issues, particularly for femme-presenting people and for other people with kind of sensitive organs. And what we and so, wouldn't you know it, by the end of the month where the TRO was issued, there was already a pretty significant area of contempt that we saw, at least on one night. So we brought that contempt claim. We presented that in front of the judge. It took several months. It took a lot of effort, but we essentially tried 11 use of force cases over the course of 2 days in front of this judge, and we had a very fancy video that had all the CG and stuff. No CG, but it was I think a great lesson in what it takes now, I think, to truly explain the scope of the various police actions, and how in the aggregate it's clear that force was being used against passively resistant people at most. And the judge agreed, at least in 3 of the 10 instances that we brought that the Portland Police Bureau had violated the judge's orders. Shockingly or not, all 3 of those instances came from one particular police officer who was notorious in this city for his brutality. And I'll never forget, he was on the stand testifying about how, I just shot somewhere between 30 to 50 rounds of my FN 303. We asked the other officers how many they shot. 0. Just one guy doing that. And the judge turned to him and said, "So, are you thinking between those shots?" I want to say that was the exact quote. And then later he grilled the city attorneys. Do you really find that credible that he's actually thinking about Do I have probable cause every time I pull that trigger? It was pretty wild. But he justified that by telling the judge, well, Your Honor, they're anarchists. So,
Wow.
not good for the city's case there, I'd say. So we got a contempt order and some sanctions that also levied additional training requirements and other things to cure the contempt. There are so many components over over that span of time. It took almost a year from the day of the filing to get that sanctions order. And I think that was another lesson that we learned, that managing a case like this does take probably more than 9 attorneys and 3 law firms to do it. And there was 100 consistent, everyday protests in Portland, at least through the first period. And every night, I'm sure we could have found something that was contempt-worthy. The fact is that, you know, given our own brains and capacity, bringing one contempt trial was a lot. And, you know, that's just one of the lessons we learned. I'll turn it over.
Did you guys have live testimony in your contempt hearing?
We did, and I think that was one of the first kind of like trials that happened over COVID. I don't know if y'all were in federal, at least in our federal courts, it kind of looked like a hockey arena. We had plexiglass everywhere and you know, a little maze of corridors and stuff. But yeah, that was. We were all trying to learn how to look still kind of cool, even though we're like sweating under our masks and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Let me take a couple of minutes. I'll set the stage on what we were doing in Seattle on the other side, and I'll bet Juan can get this deck running because there is some compiled video in there that I think is instructive. So let's go back in time to the setting. We were completely virtual in federal court in Seattle. Everything was virtual. By the way, I'm speaking as a private lawyer that represented the city. I'm not speaking on behalf of the city of Seattle at all. But the city of Seattle had a longstanding consent decree that a federal judge was overseeing that dated back a number of years. And that was Federal Judge Robart. A lawsuit was filed by a chapter of Black Lives Matter in King County and some individual protesters against the city that was specific to how they were using crowd control weapons. And so we're talking about primarily pepper spray, at least in Seattle, pepper spray and blast balls, and what they call a blue nose. It's a rubber-tipped, it's not a rubber bullet, it's a foam-tipped gun. Seattle doesn't use tear gas, so that wasn't an issue in any of our protest activities. The suit was filed, and the judge ended up entering a consent order, and some of that language would be in the deck if we put it up, but I can just review it with you. And he started with this fundamental statement, which is the same thing Juan is talking about. The First Amendment guarantees that all citizens have the right to hold and express their political beliefs through peaceful protests. Police cannot interfere with orderly, nonviolent protests because they disagree with the content of their speech. At the same time, this court must balance these interests with violent offenders who choose to disrupt constitutionally protected activity. So our challenge, there were primarily 4 protests that the plaintiffs ended up bringing before the judge as proof that we were in contempt, that we were violating the terms of his order. The order went on to say, the original order that framed how the city police department could use these tools did recognize something that on the defense side, defending police, we talk about, and that is the split-second decision-making that officers have to make in circumstances that turn from peaceful or are a blend of peaceful with some people that are intent on causing violence. And that is a practical challenge. So the language that he came up with, and I'll read this because it really frames what the issues were then in our contempt hearing. He spoke specifically about what we are going to call CCWs. So this injunction includes any chemical irritant, such as OC spray, any projectile, including flashbangs, pepper spray, and foam-tip projectiles. And this is the key language of his order. This order does not preclude individual officers from taking necessary, reasonable, proportionate, and targeted action to protect against a specific, imminent threat of physical harm to themselves or someone else identifiable. So if you look at all those qualifiers in there, it has to be necessary, reasonable, proportionate, targeted to a specific and imminent threat. So the challenge that we faced on the defense side was to assemble the information that we could from these protests. So we get body-worn video, hundreds of hours of body-worn video. We have surveillance video, and then we have civilian videos, many of which were posted on Twitter or other ways for us to get them and collect them. And then the challenge was, with a legal team that was a little bit smaller than what you referenced, was to take that, identify contextually individual applications that were being challenged, and try to show context around that. Why did that officer deploy a blast ball in that location? And if we're able to show the video, and we may not, we would take still frames from what you could see were projectiles incoming to officers in certain settings, where in real time you can't tell. It's just a dynamic. You've been there.
Right.
It's very hard to assess. And so we would try to set up a context for the judge to understand why Officer Smith, on that occasion, deployed a blast ball in that location at a targeted individual. Because we knew, under his language, if we couldn't show that level of specificity, we were going to be in trouble. There was a likelihood that we were going to be found in contempt. And so that was the challenge to us. Our hearing did not have live witnesses. It was based entirely on argument, and then obviously the video presentations that both sides had put together and presented to the court. I learned how to use iMovie very, very well in putting these together. I ended up being kind of the default tech person. I wasn't in charge of it here, otherwise the deck would be running. No, I'm not knocking anybody down, but I do know how to run a deck. Both of us came up with a sleeping laptop, so I'm not throwing stones at anybody. My point is that it was quite a challenge to put this information in together and then present it to the judge. So what we did was both build movies, and we built detailed tables with timestamps around every type of deployment, who the officer was involved, what the source of the video was, and a description of what the activity was, really to help their clerk wade through rather than watch the movie front to back, so they could go to time locations and actually look at things specifically. So that's what we did in the summer of 2020 in Seattle.
Oh,
This is a good
a
sign.
new one.
This is a good
Right.
sign. Maybe while we're getting that set up, and maybe I'll start with you, Commissioner. Is so one thing that we heard about in Juan's and Bob's comments was sort of this issue of violence, right? And how do you? I mean, you've been involved in protest activity. You now represent the city on city council. How do you deal with issues of violence and protests?
Let me say, with my long history of being involved in protests, I have always been a student of Dr. Martin Luther King, right? So I am really all about direct action, but not physical violence. What we know and what we've experienced here, especially around in 2020, was that provocateurs and others would join peaceful protests, and then a small group would break off and throw water bottles at cops for fun, or break windows around the city. That went on actually long after the protests. But here's the thing. I would say to you that if the people that were breaking windows all over the city of Portland were black and brown, we'd have found them, we'd have arrested them, and they would be facing severe jail time. But because you were white kids from the suburbs that came in to have fun, quote unquote, the police didn't have any sense of urgency about identifying who these people were. And that is the difference between what happens when it is clear that black and brown people who were really standing up for black lives at that time, and still, by the way, still matters, it appalled me to know that there was a very small group of kids. And honestly, I could have went out and actually put a circle around them and tell you exactly who they are. But the fact that we have supposedly well-trained experts who just couldn't figure out who these kids were. And I think it was on purpose that they did not identify these kids, because that was the way for them to be able to sell to the public that we needed more police and the city was out of control, and now you got to give us more money. And the police use that tactic over and over and over again in my lifetime, right? It's just, this is the latest. Hey, there it is. The latest.
Yay.
So
This is the moment you've been waiting for.
We've all been waiting. Okay, Juan.
All right.
No, I mean, I was pretty much finished with my thought, but it's again, it's like we cannot have a system that we say is a justice system that is actually built on justice for just white men, right? Justice should be available to all of us, regardless of our socioeconomic standing, our race, our first language. But as we continue to see how justice plays out, I gotta tell you, if those were 20 black kids, we'd know their names, we'd know their mama's names, we'd know where they went to school, we'd know how long they lived in Portland. But because these are white suburban kids, the police just could never find them.
Wow.
Fascinating, right?
Wow.
Right.
I'm done. I'm waiting for the video now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, right, and not remarkably, it was predominantly most of the charges that came out of 2020 were black and brown kids still in the city of Portland, which y'all have probably been here a day or so. You know what's going on here. So I like starting with Marvin Gaye. What's going on?
What's going on?
And this is probably from an older presentation of mine, but I think the general gist of what I've heard from folks in the streets is truly, if voting got us what we needed to survive in this country, we would have far fewer problems at this point. The fact is that I think enough people were seeing a system that was not built for them, that was not built to protect them, and was only built to harm them. And so direct action became the call of the day, and that's what really drove the 2020 protests. I mean, it was just a world of possibility suddenly. I come from the belief that we will not have police and prisons in a just world, and we will move towards that, and we can build that society. Right now, we still have them, obviously, but I think a lot of people thought it was suddenly very possible very quickly at that time. And that brought about a lot of acrimony, a lot of violence and property destruction, certainly, but also a lot of joy and organizing and groups that have now built up strength. And then, of course, I had to bring in Sly and the Family Stone. So there's a riot going on. That's what was going on, of course, in answer to Marvin Gaye. And that kind of dovetails with the other stuff that I was talking about. Good or bad protesters? This, I think, was the main line of reasoning and thinking I heard from people who wanted to discuss, what was the purpose of the 2020 protests? What's the purpose of your lawsuit to hold police accountable? What about the bad protesters, et cetera? What was true every night of the protests is it did not matter what kind of a protester you were. You still got hurt. You still got tear gassed. You still got shot at. You still got knocked down. You still got beat. You still got arrested. It truly did not matter who you were. You were going to get hurt. And that's another kind of animating principle of the lawsuits that we brought. And this is just a couple of pictures from. Actually, I think I took these. Yeah, these are from North Portland. That was from August 8th, and this shows things were still going strong after several months. And this, still after people were suffering from all sorts of harms from an immense amount of tear gas.
So tear gas, not to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
unlike Seattle, tear gas was a main tool up here.
Huge tool.
Wow.
It came up on FAA radar. That's how much tear gas was used at times. Just if you come to the federal courthouse down over yonder, that's where a lot of the action happened, and that's where that top left picture was taken. It was very foggy. There was one night even that there was a tear gas tornado. I've been trying to find that video, but something about pyrotechnics and airflow and something. It caused an actual tear gas tornado. Anyways, and here's some of the weapons we saw. That top left is one of those FN 303 pellets that deploy. You can see the pepper. I'm not going to try to go over the capsicum name, but there's a fancy name for that. Launched from the weapon below it, an FN 303. On the top right, that's just a smoke grenade that was commonly used in conjunction with other kind of irritants. Really, it just scared the heck out of people because they were certainly fearful of tear gas and whatnot, and they were typically launched from that thing below it, a 40-millimeter launcher. That's one version. It's not the specific one that PPB was using. But there was a lot of weaponry out there in the streets. And, of course, because Portland, we got that weird reputation. We drew somebody's attention, and he he graced us with his secret police. I try not to editorialize too much, but really we don't know who they were. And basically there was federal officers who were holed up in the federal courthouse. About mid-July or so, they really made their presence known by tear gassing even more than the Portland police, exacerbating things, becoming a whole political spectacle for the campaign that was going at that time. Portland was on several ads, and we were brought up during debates and whatnot.
And Juan, just to interrupt you, all the federal activity wasn't in front of the judge, right?
No, not in front of this judge particularly. There was another
Bands that were picking people up, at least that's what we heard.
Right, which did happen, and I represent one of the abductees, and a recent Supreme Court case, Egbert v. Boulay, probably has torpedoed a lot of Bivens actions, including one similar to that, so it's probably an FTCA claim now. Longer story. But
I think it may be important to let people know the protests were winding down when 45 sent in his federal troops. So we used to have 10,000 people easy out on the street every night, and we're now down to about 250, 300 people. And what was unique about the timing was, you may remember the Mothers Group came together to stand in front of Black lives to actually help prevent them from being tear gassed and harmed by the police. And when those federal missionaries showed up, they just attacked. If you can imagine attacking women who are there protecting other women and other people who are standing up for Black lives. No. And so it was 45 that actually ratcheted up the protest again, because I know I was sitting at home on my couch because we were all still stuck at home because of COVID. And when I saw what they were doing, I was like, oh my, we got to do something. And I did. I organized a protest on the federal steps the very next day. We brought out 3,000 people. We took down all the fences that they had put up. And guess what? I asked people, can we just make this a family-friendly, a stand for our democracy? Can we just do that this evening? I know we got a whole lot of stuff we can protest about, but just for today, can we do that? And if you can imagine 3,000 people saying yes all at the same time.
Wow. Powerful.
But here's what's happened. We had music, it was fun, we had multi-generations, seniors, babies. The moment I got in my car. It was at the very end. We were packing up the last song. As soon as the feds knew that I was no longer standing on the federal courthouse steps,
Yeah.
they opened the doors and attacked everybody with
God.
tear gas. I mean, it was, so I was home, and that was when you may have read in the paper that said, if the mayor can't police the police, give them to me. I can police them, right?
Right.
And so I just wanted to add that piece
Wow.
to you.
Absolutely. And I think it was remarkable to see Oregonians everywhere unite to say, screw that.
Get out of
yeah,
our state, get out of our city.
Right. I'm grateful to see our Attorney General here, who I was also grateful brought a lawsuit to try to stop the abductions as well. And so, you know, I think we can all agree that that was an exacerbating problem that suddenly, you know, certainly from our litigation perspective, it's like, wow, okay, we're going to have to now tease out several different agencies and find where the city can be held liable if anywhere, and it became a whole, there was battle lines drawn by federal judges, like, it was wild, but anyways, we sued. And so here's just our case caption mentioned don't shoot, and then there's some of the individually named people, and you'll notice that they are, there's meant to be a class allegation case, and we did, I'll come to that moment in a bit, but we weren't the only ones who sued as well. Journalists sued, and as did medics and legal observers and other people who were also being harmed by both the city of Portland and the feds. And I highlight this line from Judge Simon's opinion in the press case because I really liked it. As further described by the Ninth Circuit, when wrongdoing is underway, officials have great incentive to blindfold the watchful eyes of the Fourth Estate. And so what we kept seeing also in the streets was police targeting people who were filming them, people who were clearly designated as press, well-known members of the press. Yes. Another just remarkable moment when suddenly, you know, reporters who I generally respect, but, you know, I give sometimes, I think, undue favor to the police bureau, were suddenly thinking things a lot differently. And there are some things that you really just can't grasp, I think, until you've experienced it. So that they also got a restraining order. I think some other cases also got a restraining order, and those were also expanded to the feds when they entered into the scene. We got that restraining order that I mentioned, and this really is the crux of the judge's order, which basically we showed. And there was no dispute that the plaintiffs were engaged in only peaceful, non-destructive protest. And yet, they were injured. And yet, they were shot. And that gave the judge a reason to issue his injunction, which, I don't have the actual language there. But it was basically, don't tear gas unless you really, really need to. And also follow the Constitution. But they violated it, and the judge did find that there was a violation, and here is one of the descriptions of that officer who fired rounds at protesters. He highlights this one particular incident regarding a large banner. Those folks were complying with orders to disperse. They just weren't complying hard enough, at least to that officer. And we got, this might be the video. So this is the video from the contempt evening, and we used a firm, Situ, I think they're based in New York, and I forget what that stands for. But it really required, I think, it was incumbent on us to graphically display both to the public and certainly to the court what was happening that night and what we're saying are these 10 points all in one evening of violations. So this is just like a little run through of the different videos and different points of of evidence that we're going to be showing the judge. It's a fairly long video, so I don't know if I want to show all of it necessarily, but this is just kind of the graphical overview.
That's excellent.
And then it does a fun little zoom in that maybe, oh, okay. It doesn't actually want to let me forward, so I just, yeah, maybe. Oh, no, that gets to, so that doesn't flash forward, but let's see.
I'll let you drag it forward.
Ooh, little flashes. Oh, is that it? Well, maybe we can wait and just see one video.
Juan, while you're playing that, let me
Yeah.
ask you this question. How did you play that out in the course of your hearing? Was it done narratively with witnesses narrating it? Was it played to the judge like in an opening, or how did you do that?
First, we had to introduce it, and how we did that, we had our investigator who compiled most of these videos talk to the witnesses themselves, lay the foundation onto where the individual content of the videos themselves came from. We also had declarations from the people who put together the video, did some of the, I think they did some very like fancy like measuring of distances in certain videos to make sure that they're perfectly placed where they might have been taken, so that they can do like a little Google Zoom thing. So we established that as well, and then we played it for the judge. And since again this was still in the height of COVID, we wanted to make sure that the public was able to view this video. And you can see how it kind of turns into a Google Maps thing. So the court had audio that was playing a lot of the audio. So that's a fun little zoom.
Oh, that was cool.
It's really cool.
Move east. Move east. Continue east on Lombard. Do not stop. Move east now.
And so that's a little rewind. And now it zooms into the actual video of where it happened.
Is that from the body cam or somebody else's film?
Oh, yeah. It's, so I'll tell you more about body cams in a second. But
Move east. Move east. Continue east on Lombard. Do not stop. Move east now.
the gentleman highlighted right now is the officer I was talking about.
Move east. Move east. Continue east on Lombard. Do not stop. Move east now.
This is over by the police union office, and that was probably a part of their motivation to be mad because people had the nerve to protest next to their union headquarters.
Which I believe PPB designated as critical infrastructure, that Union Hall.
And then they moved.
And then they moved. So that gives you a sense of kind of the evidence that we presented in video form and how we compiled it and presented it in what we think was a digestible way. And then we also put it online so the public can see it. Yeah, so that provided the basis for our contempt motion. On the question of body cams, we are probably the largest city that does not have body cams.
I take responsibility totally for
Right, and I'm a skeptic myself of body cams in a lot of circumstances. They're coming. We're going to have body cams at some point soon, and that's a hot issue for our consent decree case. Why the skepticism? So I'll say that at least in my position as the counsel for one of our amici, the Mental Health Alliance, the presence of cameras have a bad effect on people in mental health crises, and we want clear rules on how that's going to be rolled out. And really, the body cams themselves as a fact, I don't necessarily have an issue with. It's always, what are the policies? Who gets to own the data? Who gets to alter, delete, move, transfer? Who holds on to it? All that stuff, unsurprisingly, is there are maneuverings to make that consolidated in the police bureau and the police union. So that's always been the friction, I think. But it would be absolutely helpful in a case like this. So
Let me just maybe add a comment on body cams. Seattle has body cams, and all the officers had them. And because I defend a lot of police conduct actions all over the state of Washington, the issue starts to become, why don't you have a body cam? Did you have your body cam turned off? At least in our community, there's a public expectation that there are body cam videos available. Yes. And so when you don't have it, it's like, what are you trying to get away with?
Right.
There are all these issues about collection, storage, public records request for every body cam as soon as it's recorded, and that's all independent of just from us on the civil side. Personally, I want body cams because if they show bad conduct, you address it, you get it resolved. But
I wish that were so.
Well,
I really wish that were so.
It's certainly not, but it at least helps, and it doesn't tell the full picture, but it is informative. But the absence, when it turns out to be this was the nature of the interaction and there is no documentation of it, becomes difficult.
How many people have seen people be murdered or by body cam film and nothing ever, ever, ever happened to the officer? How many? Show of hands, right? So the reality is that it's a false solution to poorly trained police officers. And when I first got to the city council, in fact, we were about to start a pilot, but the prior police commissioner had already worked a deal with the union to say that they would get to decide when it was on and when it was off.
Yeah, and that's the trust, break of trust right there.
And for me, we have to remember in Portland, we will have body cams, but it will be because we're mandated by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and we will have it to make sure that a third-party vendor owns the data, and that both the DA and the police will have access as is needed. Now, the police are pretty slick when it comes to body cams, and in fact, here, they want body cams, but not to hold themselves accountable. They want to be able to use body cam footage to actually try to solve crimes. We're not getting body cams as a tool to help police officers do their job. We're getting it to hold police accountable. So until that policy is passed by the council and signed off on by Judge Simon, right, I have been very steadfast. We don't have a policy, and we won't put one body cam on anybody if the police get to decide who sees it, who owns it, and how that is used. And I am very proud to have held the line for as many years as I've had. I take the criticism, but guess what? I've seen enough video of people being brutalized and dying at the hands of people sworn to protect and serve that I'm convinced that unless the city of Portland is clear that this is an accountability tool, it is not a crime-fighting tool, and that we have to make sure that everybody who has the ability to hold police accountable has access to that data.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, virtually,
I'm sorry? Yes, yes. I feel the love, Madam Attorney General.
the agencies that I've worked with overwhelmingly, and I'm not on the policy side, I'm defending what comes in the door, whatever that might look like. But from a policy standpoint, almost uniformly, it's a police accountability issue. And almost uniformly, the data is stored externally and has those safeguards in it.
In Seattle?
I'm not going to speak to exactly what goes on in Seattle. I represent agencies of different sizes all over the state. And at least my experience with those agencies, and I'm not going to speak to Seattle in particular. There's a consent decree with respect to Seattle, and I'm not familiar with it, and I'm not involved in that litigation. But they adopted body cams for exactly the reasons that you articulate. It's all about accountability.
So, Bob, do you want to jump forward in the slide
Yeah.
deck to your?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, don't tell me. Oh, God, I was worried actually. Do you have a way I can transfer to this jump drive really quick, or? I apologize. I thought I merged. the
That's okay.
files.
Yeah, it's what we did was not done externally. It was done internally, and it doesn't have the level of technology seen here. But it is very much driven by collection of body cams. So that puts you at eye level with things. There was some of that there, bystander video. We would collect everything. What we would try to show is, and we were able to on a couple of occasions. We had a named plaintiff in the case who was pepper sprayed dramatically because all of a sudden her camera went orange. But we were able to collect her video and show her perspective as well as body cam police officer perspective on that single incident, which frankly was kind of informative about how that unfolded from both perspectives, and put that in this. We were also able, as I was describing, our focus, since we were defending law enforcement, was to try to explain context around a particular force application, just as you were. And there were some that were questionable, and believe me, they were highlighted as well. We didn't try to cherry pick. We showed this one is probably doesn't meet your standards, Your Honor, because we were trying to be candid, forthright, and demonstrate that we were accountable for everything that happened. But we were able to highlight in images incomings to the officers that you couldn't otherwise see just because of how dynamically it happened.
Right.
So,
And, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Seattle has a consent decree, but the city of Portland has a settlement agreement. And I think the only reason now we're even close to getting body cams is because of what the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division observed during the summer protest in 2020. And the arrogance of how Portland police reported on the protest. I was embarrassed for the city of Portland when I read what they sent to the DOJ. And first sentence was, we don't know why people were so mean to us over the summer. We think they probably just were bored. They were sitting on their couch so long. Can you imagine a professional police force sending that kind of ridiculous data to the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division? Well, that's what our folks did.
Wow.
And that's why the DOJ has put both feet on our neck to make us actually hold this police department accountable. In fact, we were well on the way to actually working our way out of the settlement agreement before the summer of 2020. And every report to the DOJ since then says that we are worse off today than we were when the DOJ showed up. And by the way, I was part of that group that invited the DOJ to town to address these issues of police brutality. And so I will say, we are worse off today than we were in 90, when was that? Man, we've been living with this for like 12, 13 years now, right?
Yeah, filed in 2012, I think settlement agreement in 2014, and still chugging.
And now I'm back at the beginning almost, right? And it's because that we have police officers who don't want to be held accountable. They think they know best. And then when you don't let them do what they want to do, that's when they retaliate and do the kind of things that we've seen in the videos up here.
Joanne, I'll give you a bit of a different perspective. So the City of Seattle Police Department was under a consent, still is under a consent order that is overseen by Judge Robart. So we end up in front of a different federal judge, which we thought was interesting. A colleague down the hall dealing with force issues, dealing with how certain weapons can be used. And his colleague down the hall has the master oversight over everything the department does. And at one point, there was a little bit of a tension between them. In fact, some issues, some of the relief requested by the plaintiff, Judge Robart said, no, that's in my courtroom. It's not going to happen in Judge Jones's. One other thing that happened in our case that is quite different than what you're describing, we actually had language in our stipulated order specific to how press were to identify themselves and how not just press but medics were to identify themselves. And if they wore certain indicators, if the police messed with them, there were going to be a clear violation because there was specific language about if you wear this, you are identified for the court's orders purposes, and you better be left alone.
Oh yeah, and I do think at least PPB changed their tune on reporters after our federal judge also issued that injunction. But by that time, the feds had just shown up, and there was just rampant contempt there for I would say it was rampant contempt for the Judge Simon's orders there. But by the time that kind of died down, there was kind of a nascent mootness issue. Elections have consequences, as they say. Yeah. And I just wanted, so we did seek class certification, and we actually were not successful. And the judge particularly more or less said, listen, 1983 cases, you're trying to essentially prove 6,000 unjustified uses of force. Right. I don't think we can do that on a class-wide basis. And yet, still, in a motion that denied our relief, he starts with this sentence. Documented significant abuses by the Portland Police Bureau, described a disciplinary and oversight system unable to handle the pressure of the 2020 protests, and uncovered extreme bias and misinformation in PPB's training. That piece, I don't have that slide in here, but oh my goodness, Google a PPB training slide sometime. You'll find a presentation given to to 4 different departments in the city or in the state of Oregon, the state police, the Multnomah County sheriffs, the Salem police, and the Portland Police Bureau, ends with a slide that's, I believe it's called the Prayer of the Alt Knight, and it's a police officer beating a person with dreads, where it says like silence hippie basically, and it's like a little poem. Incredible that. Wow. For many, many reasons, but
the rest of that training slide
also
says
really
100 and I'm sorry, it was what 25, 27 slides, and the rest of it you would think we're back in the 1950s because guess what? All the bad people are black and brown, and all the good people are white, and that is how we today in 2022 train police officers. When you look, I mean, how does that not seep into your brain when all your training says good people, white, bad people, black, brown, right? And so I was upset that people were only upset about the last slide when the entire slide deck shows that they are training people to be police from the 1920s.
Oh, I see a question.
Yeah, I was going to say we've got 10 minutes left, so I think we should move to questions, please.
So really familiar with law enforcement, for example, killing Jimmy Lee Jackson, which sparked the Selma Montgomery March and Bloody Sunday. And I want to say one thing and then ask a question. I think we have to be really, really careful about the term of bad and good, particularly around protesters, because what it does, Dr. King said that rioting is the language of the unheard. And so I teach nonviolence, so I'm not advocating violence, right? But what it does is it puts it out there, and we start focusing on people, what they're doing instead of what they're trying to communicate, right? Not to mention, it's been proven that there were actors who intentionally were doing violence to try to make it be something that it wasn't. And so I think we have to be very, very careful not falling into that trap. And when media tries to get us to do that, that we don't go for it. We point it back to the issue. Why are people rioting? Why are people... The answer to people being unheard is to hear them, right? So I just want to first say that, to be very, very careful about the use of bad and good, because then everybody's bad. And so then I'm going to tear gas everybody because you're all bad. Yeah. So when we start dehumanizing people like that, we have to be very careful. My question is, oftentimes with unions get a bad name when there are people who have done bad things, right, and are defended. So my question to you, and I know that lawyers have to do their jobs, and so not knocking that. My question to you is, even when, for example, police unions have to defend their members, are they doing other things like, making sure that things that are written about in My Grandmother's Hands, if you haven't read it, please do, to make sure that officers are getting other kinds of training and healing and all these other things to, even if I'm going to protect you so you won't go to jail, at least you get something else so maybe you won't do it again. I'm just wondering, even in doing their job, is it, if it's something bigger than that as well? Is the view that my job is bigger than just protecting you in this moment, but looking at protecting you in a bigger piece of protecting you as you are supposed to protect and serve?
What was the thing you said we should read?
Oh, My Grandmother's Hands. It's a wonderful book. I'll just say in short, it says trauma black people, trauma white people, trauma police officers, no excuses, get to the root cause so we won't keep going in this circle.
Yeah.
I was asking Attorney Bobby.
Oh, you were looking at me, I wasn't sure. So just to be clear, I'm never hired by a union. I have no involvement in union activities as they work with law enforcement, so I really don't have any information to speak to that. I'm brought in by often insurance companies for cities, or if they're self-insured, very specifically in the context of pending litigation, suits against law enforcement. So I'm in federal court, I'm on the opposite side of a caption on federal civil rights claim, and I'm not involved in policy issues relating to that or training issues. It's always in the context of an individual action and a lawsuit. And my role on this panel was just to speak to someone who is working on the opposite side of a caption with a different agency in a different setting. So I'm sorry, I really can't add value to your question, which was a great question.
Well, maybe you could just share that information.
I will. No, it was, and I completely agree with you. Can't characterize any of these situations as good and bad. What's dynamic about all these, what we found is it's a blended mixture, but it comes back to the very fundamental right of people have a First Amendment right, and they have a right to be out there peacefully protesting. That's exactly what our judge said, and our focus, at least narrowly, was not on that right. It was all about, are there times when the individuals, and it had to be individualized, you could identify individuals that had stepped over that line that justified law enforcement doing something different, but it could never be categorical. So I'm listening to the context of the Portland litigation really in detail for the first time. Ours was nothing like that. In so many ways, just because of, I don't know why, but it wasn't anything like
I have some
Maybe
theories.
the lack of federal officers.
what you've explained.
Right. That may have something to do with it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Khala. I'm a 3L from Detroit, Michigan. Detroit is a majority black city, and my question is, what role as lawyers can we take to kind of relieve the tension between police departments and average citizens. I've done a lot of research. My background is communication studies, mass media, this type of stuff. This semester particularly, I'm doing a lot of research into modern policing. And the consensus seems to be that on the one hand, you have police officers who believe that, the citizens have no faith in us. They don't trust us at all. So why, make the effort to, put in the effort to a community that isn't going to take it well anyway. And then you have citizens on the other end who are like, well, we're not upset for no reason. There's legitimate reasons why we're upset at you and we don't trust you and things like that. So as lawyers, you don't have a case or a client unless there's already been damage, unless there's already been abuse of power or a police officer is messed up. So what can we do as lawyers, or for me as a future lawyer, regardless of practice area, to kind of ease that tension again, or make things better so that we're not just treating a symptom for a disease that keeps getting worse and worse?
And run for a public office. Take your law degree and run to serve your community in that capacity. And I'm not joking at all. Right? Having somebody with a great legal mind in public office is ideal. I can tell you I have a lawyer on my staff, and I intentionally got a lawyer on my staff that looks like most of the lawyers that run around the city of Portland, because I knew I needed somebody that would go in those rooms and go toe-to-toe with folks who don't think I should be on the city council and don't care about the issues that I'm passionate about, right? So I would highly encourage elected office. I'd encourage policy work. I think a law degree opens up so many doors for you that you could do anything you wanted to do. And I would my caveat is, make sure that you're feeding your passion, right? Because if you're feeding your passion, I believe it's never work. It's something you're gonna do anyway, right? So that's my advice, as the non-lawyer on the panel.
Your last question was about what advice, I guess, can we give to a group of newer members to the bar, and I think I'll use my response quickly to just address that. And you just nailed it. You have to, as a lawyer, bring your integrity to what you're doing. And the joy I get out of federal civil rights cases is you're in front of Article III judges, and so you're speaking to people that have integrity. And when you're at this for a long time, the takeaways that I guess I would give to you as someone that's deep in their career is stay on the high road. There are always opportunities to fall off the high road, and it doesn't matter which side you start on in terms of your client. Stay on the high road in terms of civility and professionalism. When I was a very young lawyer, my first senior partner told me a very simple point, and he said, "It is a long, straight road." And that has been something I have repeated to every lawyer that I have ever worked with, because what you do now to someone in a litigation setting, you may regret in 20 years when they're on the other side of the caption and you need something from them. So why burn that bridge? And it's consistent with staying on the high road. And I'll finish with these 2 points, and it's clear from the people in the room. You need to be interested and you need to be interesting. If you are those things in this practice, you'll have success, and you also have to be professionally involved. So the fact that you folks are here in this setting, listening, engaging at this early point in your careers is, frankly, it's inspirational. So thank you very much.
Juan, I'll let you have the last word. Any closing thoughts?
Oh, boy. Get out there and meet people. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I think the problem lawyers often cause is when we think we're the leaders of every movement. There's a crowd. They need a leader. Of course, it's me. I'm going to run out there, find me a client, get in front of that judge. I like to see our role as a type of support for movements, as a support for the community who otherwise wouldn't have as easy of access into, an intimidating. We talk a lot about access to justice. But usually it stops at the access part. Like, all right, you got through the doors. Great. Now you're on your own. And so really I think being there for people, being there for the community, and following their needs. They will tell you exactly what they need. And the movement will dictate the legal strategy in a lot of ways. But I think to your point about trust and police departments, I mean, I think that is the crux of the problem now. There is nothing that the Portland Police Bureau could say today that would make anybody feel better about what happened over the last couple of years and decades. And why that is because why would we ever trust them after all they've done and after all the other efforts that they've taken to undermine that kind of progress or stack the deck in their favor? And I don't say this stuff lightly. I wish I could be more generous here, but it's just there is not a moment where the deck isn't trying to be stacked. And so I think there needs to be a common understanding that you're not under siege here. We are asking you to treat us how a dignified human should be treated. It's a simple ask, and it's rarely met. So, but to also just being a lawyer, you will be in rooms where there are people who will be forced to listen to you. I have the microphone, and I'm going to sing this karaoke song. You know, and you'll be talking to the attorney on the other side who might agree with you on a lot of things. You'll talk to the risk adjusters who also see future risk in not changing the course. Whenever there's I'll use a prison example. You know, if I had a client whose kidney stones weren't treated, we can talk about like, well, listen, you had this system in place to check in on this person, and you didn't follow it. What can we do to make that better? And often they recognize that you're right, we should make that better. So there are instances where you can build, even from an adversarial position, trust with a system you might not entirely care for or want to perpetuate, but at least you can protect people in the meantime.
All right. We're over time. Join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you, guys. Great job. Thank you, everyone, for staying to the end. You've earned a great cruise.